Welcome to Folklore for Sleep, a quiet place where history settles like mist over forgotten fields, where old stories drift gently on the wind, and where the flickering flame of memory glows just bright enough to guide you into rest. Tonight, we wander far from royal courts and holy cathedrals. We leave behind the battles and banners, the thrones and the saints carved in gold. Instead, we descend down muddy footpaths, past hollow trees, into the low-lying lands, the marshes and moors, the borderlands between belief and bog. Here, life was lived close to the ground and to the strange, where medicine was something you dug with your fingers or whispered over water, where remedies and rituals walked hand in hand. Our journey will take us through 4 quiet chapters. First, to the murky banks where leeches were gathered by hand and watched by eyes that weren't always human. Then to the firelit lab of a man who claimed he could speak with spirits and bottle them. Next, to the moonlit roads where villagers danced uncontrollably, gripped by a strange and spreading trance. And finally, to a noblewoman's herb garden, where protection from plague and poison came not through power, but through petals, prayers, and perhaps a little spell work. Let your shoulders soften, let your breath slow, and let us begin where the ground is wet and the reeds whisper your name. Folk cures, foul waters, and creatures said to whisper in the reeds. Imagine yourself, not in a bustling town or near a castle's glow, but at the edge of things, where land gives way to water and water forgets to behave, where the soil is neither firm nor free, and the horizon always seems to be retreating in a mist. Your home is low to the ground, built from timber felled long ago, with a thatched roof gone green from decades of soft rain. Smoke drifts faintly from the chimney, though the fire inside is barely warm. The morning comes quietly, the kind of morning that doesn't announce itself. No birdsong, no church bell, just the steady breath of wind across water and the occasional creak of old wood shifting in the cold. You dress slowly, each layer of wool and flax stiff from yesterday's dampness. You wrap your feet in oiled leather, hoping to keep the wet at bay, but you know it never does. Sooner or later, the water finds a way in. You carry a simple bundle, jars of thick glass, stoppered with wax, a length of linen, a curved spatula carved from antler, and a pouch of dried herbs, not for healing, but for scent, because the marsh smells alive, not fresh like spring water, but rich, ancient, foul and fragrant all at once. The air is thick with decay and growth, with rot and bloom together. Your journey begins along a narrow plank path set down years ago when the marsh swallowed a mule. Even now, the path wobbles underfoot. The planks are slick and some have sunk at the edges, but you've learned where to step. Around you, reeds sway, some taller than a man, some bent like listening heads. It's easy to imagine they hear you pass. Easier still to believe they whisper once you're gone. By mid-morning, the water is waist-high in places. You wade through slowly, disturbing nothing more than dragonflies and the occasional ripple that does not come from you. Your mentor, an old woman called merely the herb wife, once told you that the marsh chooses who it wounds, that some come home with clean skin, and others with marks that linger for weeks. She never said why, only that the ones who are kind to the water are usually the ones who return. The leeches are waiting. They cling to lily roots and driftwood, hidden in the dark places between reeds and shadow. To gather them, You must bait them. You unwrap the linen from your thigh. It's stained already from yesterday, but that doesn't matter. The scent of blood is what draws them. And so you wait. The first touch is always the same. A slight tug, like a button being fastened. Then the numbness. Warm at first, then cool, as though the marsh is drinking from you through the mouths of its little creatures. You watch as one grows fat, its skin glossy like oil. It gorges quickly. It's not hungry for long. You collect it with practiced hands. Not too fast, not too slow. Each movement deliberate, like a ritual. And maybe that's what this is. Because for all the talk of medicine and humors, there is something older here. Something that predates books and guilds. A feeling that the marsh knows you and remembers. The herb wife told you stories of women who could speak to water, who knew the names of every moss and mold, who could call frogs with their breath and still the blood of a wound with a rhyme. Most were called witches. Some were burned. But here, in the bog, no one comes to burn what they do not see. You fill your jars. Slowly, carefully. You whisper thanks with each one, though you don't know if it matters. Once, the herb wife caught you swatting a horsefly. She made you drop your bucket and walk barefoot through the reeds as penance. Every sting buys silence, she'd said. Every wound earns knowledge. You didn't understand then. You're not sure you do now. But you've never swatted another fly. By noon, the sun has risen, though you can't see it. Only the gray haze brightening a little at the edges. You make your way back, your legs streaked with blood and marsh scum. Your boots heavy, your arms trembling slightly. When you reach the old tree, the one with the roots that look like fingers, you pause. Some say a woman is buried there, not laid to rest, but placed as an offering. You don't ask questions. You just leave a single coin pressed into the bark. Back at home, the herb wife is boiling vinegar. The smell is sharp and cleansing. She nods at your jars, inspects your skin, and says only, "They took just enough." She means the leeches, or maybe the marsh. Later, you sit by the fire, not too close. Heat stings your bites. You sip a broth made from bones and bitter root. Outside, the frogs begin to sing, and you wonder, not for the first time, if they are truly frogs, or something else, wearing their voices. The house settles around you, and your eyes grow heavy. Tomorrow, the marsh will still be there, still hungry, still whispering. But tonight it sleeps, and so will you. Now we drift, out of the reed-choked bogs and the murky silence of leech water. We rise slowly up through mist and slope. The land dries. The air grows sharper, not cleaner exactly, but clearer, more metallic. We are headed inland, into the stony ribs of Europe, to the steep-roofed towns that nestle beside rivers, to the crossroads where Latin meets German, and merchants speak in a jumble of dialects and dreams. We arrive in Basel, a city that straddles what we now call Switzerland, but what was then a tense and shifting patchwork of alliances, guilds, and grievances. In the 16th century, it was a place of learning and suspicion, of printing presses and plagues, of rising minds and burning books, and somewhere among its winding streets, thick with chimney smoke and the tang of tannery runoff, walks a strange figure. His name was Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, a name so elaborate it almost seems made to be forgotten. But you and many others may know him by the title he gave himself, Paracelsus, meaning beyond Celsus, an ancient Roman writer on medicine, a name that was not just a pseudonym, but a challenge, a statement. I go further. I break what needs breaking. He was not tall, broad-shouldered, round-faced, his brow always furrowed as though in argument with the air itself. Some said he drank too much. Others, that he didn't drink nearly enough to make his ideas tolerable. He dressed more like a soldier than a scholar. A broad coat, a sword always at his side. Not a rapier of elegance, but a heavy thing, more ceremonial than practical. Some whispered it could speak, that it held a spirit, that it sang in Latin. He was a physician, an alchemist, a wanderer, a writer of so many words. Most people never finished his books. But to understand Paracelsus, you must understand that in his world, the line between science and sorcery was not a line at all. It was a thread, fine, fragile, and frequently crossed. He believed in invisible forces, not just wind or magnetism, but spiritual forces. Illness was not only about imbalance in the body, it was about imbalance in the soul. He traveled constantly, on foot, on horseback, by riverboat, from the mines of Tyrol to the libraries of Ferrara, from Strasbourg to the spired churches of Vienna. And everywhere he went, he gathered knowledge, not from professors, but from butchers, not from bishops, but from beggars, midwives, blacksmiths, grave diggers, shepherds. He said, "Who can speak of the body if he has not seen it broken?" Paracelsus rejected the standard textbooks of his day. He believed they were dead knowledge, written by those long gone, preserved like insects in amber. He preferred the living world, the symptoms that moved and changed with weather and season, the cures found not in libraries, but in fields, furnaces, and sometimes dreams. He introduced the idea that chemicals could be used in healing. Mercury, sulfur, salt, not as poisons, but as principles. He wrote of them as sacred elements. Sulfur as the soul, mercury as the spirit, salt as the body. It was both metaphor and medicine. In his workshop, fires burned day and night. Not wild flames, but controlled, measured. A crucible here, a coiled glass tube there, beakers bubbling with liquid green or gold. The air thick with a bitter scent, half herb, half metal. He called his art spagyria, the alchemical blending of plant and spirit. He believed that every substance held a hidden essence, and if one could unlock it carefully, respectfully, it could heal not just the flesh, but the very fate of a person. There are stories that he created a homunculus, a tiny artificial man, born not of womb, but a flask. That he wrote a lost book, one that could summon the spirits of illness, not to banish them, but to negotiate with them. He was fascinated by elementals, creatures not made of flesh, but of substance. Gnomes, deep in the earth. Sylphs, invisible in the air. Undines, quiet beneath water. Salamanders, flickering in flame. He wrote that these beings lived alongside us, but could not be seen by the untrained eye. And sometimes, if you left out a pinch of salt and a whispered word, they might reveal themselves. Paracelsus was, in many ways, a bridge between old magic and new science, between the fading medieval world and the dawn of modern medicine. He was ridiculed, accused of arrogance, feared, respected. In Basel, he taught briefly, until he burned the works of Galen in public and was asked, firmly, to leave. He died young, maybe in Salzburg, maybe poisoned, maybe not. Even his death is uncertain, a final mystery, fitting perhaps for a man who claimed even death had its alchemy. Today, we call him a pioneer, but for centuries, he was simply a shadow, a figure passed between whispering apothecaries and hedge healers who left offerings to the air before grinding their roots. He lives on not just in science, but in folklore. Some say that if you light a fire with wood soaked in wine and speak his true name, he will appear, not as a ghost, but as a presence, to help or to challenge. Because Paracelsus never offered comfort, only change, and in that, perhaps, he remains one of the last magicians who truly believed that the world itself is alive and waiting to be named. Let us drift now, away from alchemical flames and the cloaked figure of Paracelsus, away from the controlled burn of his furnaces, and into something stranger. Something less contained, something that trembles just beyond understanding. The year is not always clear. Some say it was 1237, others say 1374 or 1518, but the place is often the same. Germany, France, the Low Countries. Europe in the Middle Ages was no stranger to affliction. There were wars, there were famines, there were endless rumors of the end of days, but none of that quite prepares you for what happens next. Imagine this. You're standing in the village square. It is early morning, and the sun is struggling to lift itself above the steeple. Vendors are setting up stalls. A dog barks distantly. Someone is sweeping hay from the cobblestones. Then, you hear a rhythm. Feet, dozens of feet. At first, it sounds like a celebration, a wedding perhaps, or a harvest song, but then you see them, people, men and women, dancing, not slowly, not gracefully, but with intensity. Their faces are blank, or twisted. Some are crying, some are laughing, some are silent altogether. They do not stop. They dance through the morning, through the heat of midday, through the tolling of vespers, and when night falls, they continue still. They collapse from exhaustion. Some rise again, some do not. This was the dancing plague, a phenomenon that defies clear explanation. Groups, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people who danced uncontrollably for days, even weeks. It began, often, with a single person, a woman stepping into the street, eyes wide, hands raised, moving to music that no one else could hear. And soon, others joined. It spread like wildfire, but without flame, through villages, across provinces. In Strasbourg, in 1518, the city officials panicked. At first, they tried to ignore it. Then, they try to help it burn itself out. They hire musicians, build a stage, encourage the dancers to dance until it passed. But it did not pass. It deepened. Some danced until their feet bled. Some foamed at the mouth. Some died of exhaustion, their bodies collapsing like broken marionettes in the street. And no one could agree on what it was. Some said it was Saint Vitus, a saint known to protect against seizures and neurological illness. They called it Curious Sancti Vitae, or Saint Vitus Dance. Pilgrimages were made, statues were anointed, songs were sung in the saint's name. Others whispered of witchcraft, of cursed rivers and bad grain, of deals made in secret glades under the waning moon. The physicians offered what they could. Some claimed it was caused by overheated blood. Others blamed the alignment of the planets. Still others suggested it was a kind of melancholy that had turned outward. And then there were the folk explanations, that the dancers had seen something they could not forget. A face in the woods, a woman with backwards feet, a child with eyes like old coins, that they had been touched, not by disease, but by something older, In some villages, they were treated like the possessed, in others like saints. People brought them offerings, candles, herbs, coins. Some danced with them, hoping to be healed. The air around them was said to hum like a swarm of bees, or distant chanting just beneath the wind. They often danced near churches, or bridges, or places where a tragedy had once occurred. The sights blurred the line between sacred and sorrowful, and the more people tried to explain it, the more it evaded definition. Modern scholars suggest ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on rye and causes hallucinations. Others cite mass hysteria, now called mass psychogenic illness, when communities under pressure erupt in shared physical symptoms. And while those theories are plausible, they do not explain the rhythm, because those who saw it, wrote of it, remembered it, all agreed there was a pulse to the movement, a music heard by none and yet obeyed by many. A few medieval accounts mention dancers who, even while writhing and flailing, whispered strange songs, words in no known language, names not spoken before. And one chronicler, writing from the Rhineland, noted this. Their eyes were closed, and yet they moved in time, as if guided, as if led by something that knew the end of the song, even if they did not. The church, unsettled by what it could not name, eventually banned certain songs. A melody called The Wound of Christ was said to trigger more outbreaks. Its notes, slow and sorrowful, were forbidden, and still the dancers came, for decades, then centuries, and then the phenomenon faded. No grand conclusion, no final case, just silence. The last recorded outbreak was in the 17th century, and then nothing. But some say it lives on, in other forms, in crowds that sway uncontrollably, in night terrors that begin with footsteps, in dreams where you cannot stop moving no matter how tired you are. And there are old charms, still hidden in the walls of some German houses. Twisted ribbons, bits of bone, dried fennel, meant to keep the dancers out. Tonight, in the quiet of your room, the rhythm of your heart is steady. The night air is still, but somewhere, in a memory long buried, there is music in a stone square, and a single figure stepping out to dance. Let's turn now from the moonlit squares of plague dancers to the quiet courtyards of stone manors, where the air is heavy with rosemary and drying thyme. We are no longer in the domain of saints or curses or mass delusion. We step into something gentler, but no less potent. You are in a walled garden. The hour is late afternoon. Clouds drift across a slow sky, and you hear snipping, scissors through stem, cloth brushing against linen. The woman before you moves with purpose, though unhurried. She does not wear a crown, nor a witch's hat, but she carries a small leather-bound book and something older in her eyes. She is a noblewoman, but not a lady of courtly feasts or politics. She does not speak of tournaments or alliances. Her realm is quieter, smaller perhaps, but deeper. She walks the pathways between rue and sage, between feverfew and foxglove. She speaks to bees as she passes. She hums while she works. Her name is lost to us, but her spellbook remains. Somewhere, deep in an archive, its pages cracked with age, its ink faded to brown, lies the evidence of a life spent at the intersection of healing, prayer, and something like magic. We call them recipe books, though they contain more than recipes. They are part cookbook, part medical ledger, part lunar chart, part prayer book, Some include notes on when to harvest herbs. Rue, taken at dawn before the cock crows, dries the eyes of sorrow. Some include charms. Against the evil eye, wear a ring of silver blessed thrice, and buried once beneath elder root. And others are simple records. Of which tincture ease a cough, which ointment lessen the fever, which patient did not return. These women, educated, wealthy, often cloistered by class, had access to rare texts and rarer time, and they used both to collect knowledge passed down from servants, from midwives, from traveling friars, and from whisper. Imagine her, seated in the solar, a room warmed by the afternoon sun, with narrow glass windows and bunches of herbs hung from the rafters. She copies from a book her aunt once owned, written half in Latin, half in French. She adds her own annotations in the margin, not for use in winter, too strong for children, tested on Merelda with some success. She is not a witch, not exactly, but she is also not one, because in medieval Europe, magic and medicine were rarely separate. They were overlapping languages, spoken with different accents. A poultice for pain might include honey, crushed lavender, and a prayer to Saint Bridget. A treatment for night terrors might involve warm milk and chalk symbols drawn under the bed. The spell book was not filled with lightning bolts or flying charms. It was a place where knowledge was preserved, because it had to be. Where else would a woman, even one of status, place the learnings of her lifetime? She could not publish. She could not lecture. She could only write, and hope someone, daughter, niece, maid, would read after her. Some entries are almost poetic. For the grief that sits in the chest and makes the breath shallow, burn rose petals and speak the name of the lost into the smoke. Others are blunt. If the bleeding continues past the moon's turn, seek willow bark and prepare for death. In the margins, there are fingerprints, stains from pressed leaves, soot, wax drips from candles long extinguished. The book is not just a record. It is a map of faith and failure, of hope and practicality. She writes of moon phases, of when to plant, when to cut, when to stay indoors and let the spirits pass. For she believes, as many did, that illness was not always of the flesh. It could be sent, or called, or inherited. And so, the book includes protection spells for newborns, for fields, for travelers. Some are religious in tone. Blessed Mary, wrap this child in your veil and keep the shadows from her door. Others are more ambiguous. Salt and nettle at the threshold, vinegar across the sill. Speak no name till sunrise. In times of sickness, she prepares cordials, a blend of wine and herbs meant to warm the belly and ease the mind. In times of sorrow, she sends dried violet in a linen pouch to those who've lost a child. She has a reputation. Some in the village trust her. Others whisper. A few call her blessed. A few call her cursed. And all of it becomes part of the story that clings to her like the scent of rosemary to old parchment. She is not burned. She is not accused. But she is remembered. Because long after her passing, her book remains, folded into drawers, hidden behind church panels, or buried beneath stone floors. Modern historians find them still, quiet bundles wrapped in cloth, ink faded but legible, Latin and French and strange Old English all crowding together on the page. They are windows to lives both mundane and mystical. Because for all our modern understanding, there is something profoundly human about that little leather-bound book. about a woman kneeling beside her herbs, muttering words to herself, not for power, not for glory, but for comfort, for care, for continuity. Tonight, you may keep your windows closed. You may not believe in charms or spells, but in your medicine cabinet, your teas, your balms, your routines, you may find echoes of her garden, of her whispered words beneath a crescent moon. And so, as we prepare to close this journey, let's leave her with care. Let her return to her rosemary. Let the pages turn themselves in the wind, and let the spellbooks sleep once more. And now, we return. We return from the crooked paths of her gardens, from muddy wetlands where reeds murmur secrets, from shadowy halls echoing with riddles, and from the pages of quiet spellbooks pressed with time and memory. We have walked through swamps, listened to saints who bled and women who brewed, watched dancers lose themselves beneath the moon, and paused beside a noblewoman's garden bench as the dusk took hold. It has been a journey, not through battlefields or grand palaces, but through the back doors of medieval life, through footpaths barely visible on maps, through the liminal places where science and superstition wove themselves into something human. The truth is, we'll never fully untangle it. We'll never know for certain what the vulva whispered, why the dancers danced, what exactly brewed in the small clay pots tucked behind oak doors. But that's part of the magic, because in these foggy corners of the past, where history softens into folklore and belief becomes breath, we find something comforting, a reminder that people have always sought meaning, always sought healing, always tried to leave behind just enough to be remembered. And so, whether you sleep surrounded by books or in a room humming with modern light, you share something with them, a need for stories, a need for pattern, for protection, for peace. Let that peace find you now. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts drift, like mist across still water. Let the witches return to their reeds. Let the saints fade back into parchment. Let the dancers rest. Let the spellbook close. And let you too close your eyes. Thank you for listening to Folklore for Sleep. May the night be kind. May the dreams be soft. And may you wake gently, with just a hint of magic still lingering in the air. Good night.